High above France on an April morning in 1943, 27,000 feet in the cold sky, German pilot Oberleutnant Ralph Hermichen grinned behind his oxygen mask. Through the clear glass of his Focke-Wulf 190A5, he watched awkward shapes struggling to climb toward his formation. This veteran ace from Jagdgeschwader 26 studied the American fighters, making their first appearance over occupied Europe. "The Americans sent us flying milk bottles," he radioed to his wingman, laughing at the sight of the huge Republic P-47 Thunderbolt struggling to gain height. Below them, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts from the 4th Fighter Group pushed upward in tight formation. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines worked hard against their 7-ton weight. To German pilots who knew the sleek Spitfires and quick Soviet fighters, these fat American machines looked almost funny. Their barrel-shaped bodies wore greenhouse-style canopies, wings that appeared too small for their massive frames, and propellers bigger than anything in the Luftwaffe collection. What Hermichen didn't realize, what none of the German pilots circling like hunting wolves above could imagine, was that they were seeing the weapon that would completely wreck the Luftwaffe's fighter force. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would change from jokes into tools of terror. Their 850 caliber Browning machine guns would become the most terrifying sound in German skies. The numbers of destruction were already loaded in those wide wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, firing together at 6,000 rounds per minute, enough power to cut a fighter plane in half in under 2 seconds. The change started that April morning when Major Donald Blakesley, leading the 335th Fighter Squadron, saw the German formation getting ready to attack. The former Eagle Squadron veteran, who had switched from RAF Spitfires just weeks before, understood what his men didn't yet grasp. Surviving in the P-47 meant forgetting everything they thought they knew about air fighting. The Thunderbolt was completely different from normal fighter design ideas. While the Germans had built lightweight interceptors, made for climbing and turning well, Republic Aviation had created something never seen before. A high-altitude monster that used weight, power, and firepower to change the rules of air combat. Among the 56 American pilots scattered across the French sky that morning were men who would become famous, future aces whose names would make Luftwaffe hearts race with fear. But on April 8, 1943, they were beginners in an unproven machine, facing the most skilled fighter force in the world. The Germans had been fighting without stop since 1939, with veterans from Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This is the story of how factory strength beat fighting skill, how numbers and excellence combined into crushing dominance, and how German pilots' laughter turned to fear as they learned what synchronized Browning machine guns could do to an aircraft at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt came from a June 1940 panic. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, got urgent requirements from the U.S. Army Air Corps. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor able to match the Luftwaffe's finest. What Kartveli designed instead was a beast that redefined what was possible. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his design team. "But it will be a dinosaur with perfect balance." The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its earlier version, the P-43 Lancer. The huge turbo-supercharger system with its complicated tubes running through the rear body gave it an almost bulging look. Test pilots walking up to it for the first time always asked the same thing. This thing actually flies. Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at high altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder round engine making 2,000 horsepower, could keep full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters struggled for air. The turbo-supercharger, fed by exhaust gases, gave sea-level power in the thin air where normal superchargers couldn't work. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke, leading the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, hated the aircraft at first. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of battle. It spun on landing, flipped on takeoff, and dove with such eagerness that pilots discovered their controls froze as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who learned it found something amazing. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight. It was like riding a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat meetings in April and May 1943 proved every German belief. The P-47s couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109s, couldn't match their nimble handling at medium heights. Luftwaffe pilots quickly created tactics to use these weaknesses, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolts struggled, forcing turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first meeting. The new American fighter is meat for slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indianer, fat targets pretending to be warriors. The numbers seem to prove German confidence. In their first month flying missions, the American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF, watching from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested the Americans might rethink their choice of plane. British pilots joked that the best escape move in a P-47 was to unbuckle and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening in those early battles that German intelligence didn't notice. The P-47s that got shot down had taken incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft came back from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun hits, damage that would have blown apart a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The huge round engine, without vulnerable cooling systems, ignored hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter dead. More importantly, when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were terrible. The Thunderbolt's weapons created a zone of destruction that German pilots had never seen. Unlike the rifle-sized weapons of early warfighters or the cannons with limited ammunition, the American fighter could keep firing for over 30 seconds, forever in air combat. The event that would start changing German views happened on June 26, 1943, over Le Havre, France. It involved 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, and a meeting that would become famous on both sides of the war. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was coming back from escort duty when they were jumped by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from JG-26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans carried out a perfect attack, diving from the sun with overwhelming speed. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the back of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers, taking deadly damage in the first seconds of combat. 20 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit. The engine cover was torn away and fire broke out behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by metal pieces and bullet fragments, tried to bail out, but found the canopy was stuck. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every idea about combat damage. Despite having no forward view through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely working engine that shook violently, and controls that only sometimes responded, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 kept flying with damage that would have turned any other fighter into falling pieces. Then it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unknown pilot from JG-26, found the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never definitely identified this pilot, though several names have been suggested based on German combat reports from that day. What followed was one of the most incredible meetings in air warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to dodge, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition supply. Then the German moved position and fired again, this time with only his machine guns. With the cannon ammunition gone, the German pilot pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly, young, blonde, his expression changing from confidence to confusion to something like fear. The German moved position and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still it flew. The Thunderbolt. Still it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in clear amazement, gave a casual salute and turned away, presumably out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston, with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had blown up against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. The control cables were partly cut. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the body, were shot through. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence receiving combat reports from JG-26 at first refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment, but testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver and survived. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to use the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, the 56th Fighter Group commander, had found the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, first seen as a problem, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve even in a straight-down dive. This speed could be changed to altitude in a zoom climb that left chasing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, who would become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic, though pilots called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of fighting in traditional dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could work well. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll upside down and dive, reaching speeds that made aiming impossible for defending Germans. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead, the combined firepower creating an unstoppable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this pattern didn't just fall. They came apart. The true display of American firepower came during the August 17, 1943, double raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest push into Germany tried to that date. This mission would show both the P-47's limits, its range even with drop tanks, and its terrifying power when used properly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, found a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft, getting ready to attack B-17s with their heavy cannons and rockets. The twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less able to turn, were the Luftwaffe's special bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Mi-110s who survived, later told in a prisoner interrogation, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters, good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart, not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from body, tail cut off. The crew area shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 1 to 10 became nothing. 8 Mi-110s were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never faced such focused firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At meeting distance, usually set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' flight paths crossed in a zone roughly 6 feet wide. Anything in that zone faced 100 bullets per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was a display of American factory power. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could keep firing for over half a minute. The standard combat load mixed armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and standard ball ammunition in patterns designed to both destroy and burn. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. "When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him." By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrible reality about the P-47. Its performance got much better with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine kept its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German fighters relying on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers saw their performance drop badly above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, met this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190 A6 slow and unresponsive in the thin air. The BMW 801 engine, powerful at medium heights, was gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its detailed nose art. Johnson's combat report was simple. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree angle. Saw hits along entire body. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute seen. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both Eastern and Western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The German High Command ordered an immediate investigation into the P-47's abilities. The report delivered to Reich Marshal Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. The Thunderbolt service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, half-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine. Most disturbingly, its tough construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 normal fighters and still return home. In January 1944, a new version of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the change from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydraulic propeller with paddle blades, 13 feet wide with broad blade sections that bit into the air like massive oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic, where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at a weak 2,200 feet per minute at sea level. The paddle blade versions could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or beating German fighters at most heights. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47s to build energy faster in level flight. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, met the new versions in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced to formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to break away, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart, nothing left but smoke and pieces. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching near sound speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard setup carried 2 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank, extending range to over 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when loaded, Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms right after dropping tanks. The Luftwaffe's response was to focus on the bombers, hoping to cause enough losses to stop the American daylight campaign. But this required flying through the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly deadly choice. German pilots developed a grudging respect. that bordered on fear for the big American fighters. Major Günther Rall, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, survived a meeting with P-47s on March 6, 1944 that left him badly wounded. He later remembered in an after-war interview, "We saw them above us, fat shapes against the sun. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters, just gone, changed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death." The escort missions revealed another P-47 advantage: endurance. While German fighters operated at maximum power settings that burned fuel rapidly, the big American round engines could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating top cover while keeping enough fuel for combat and return. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in German experience. The transition began in earnest in April 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could pierce the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch bullets into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that changed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 version could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the body, a bomb load equal to early war medium bombers. Later versions added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equal to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles changed into burning wreckage in one pass. The mental effect on the men was crushing. They called them Jabos, fighter bombers, but these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader 2, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported. The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,147 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, badly hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new hiding techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 80mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. While devastating Europe, the P-47 was at the same time proving its worth in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group operating from New Guinea discovered that the Thunderbolt's qualities were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific War. Colonel Neil Kirby, commanding the 348th, developed tactics specifically for the Pacific. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, shooting down 6 enemy planes himself in a single mission, earning him the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, used to fighting nimble but fragile American fighters, were unprepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and toughness. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who met P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannons, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying. Streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart. The P-47N, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity with wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending range to 2,350 miles. This version would escort B-29s to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon." Perhaps the ultimate proof of the P-47's evolution came in its meetings with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me-262, with its 540 miles per hour top speed, should have been untouchable by propeller-driven fighters. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch jets in 2 situations: during takeoff and landing when jets were most vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down a Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer's guns opened up at 400 yards. Meyer's combat report noted, "The enemy aircraft came apart under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the body. The pilot did not escape. The focused fire of 850 caliber guns proved more effective than we expected against jet aircraft." By early 1945, specialized P-47M versions were deployed specifically to counter German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting power to 2,800 horsepower and refined airflow design, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet, fast enough to intercept even jets under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron equipped with P-47Ms, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. "The jets are faster, but they can't turn and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery and they come apart like they're made of paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them." The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, including their best remaining pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot brought to the command post pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that, Major George?" Brooking's response became famous throughout the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line, where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stands for replacements. "By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47 D-40s filled the flight line, flown in from depots in England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. These losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all attacked airfields, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of certain defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,783 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed 1 Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built from empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual pieces, machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that exceeded peacetime standards. The ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 mission required 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition use exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, one of several ammunition plants, produced 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge was made to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, ensuring reliable feeding through the synchronized gun mechanisms. The fuel use was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in normal flight, up to 300 gallons in combat, with water injection engaged. The 9th Air Force alone consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly by late 1944, all of it shipped across the Atlantic in tankers that were themselves products of American mass production. Even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with less than 100 hours total time by war's end. The quality showed in combat. American pilots arrived in Europe trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding their enemy's abilities and limits. They knew their aircraft systems completely, having studied technical manuals that German pilots never received. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, showed the American training advantage. I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 hours in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced angle shooting, studied gun camera film from actual combat. My first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight. In March 1945, Oberst Josef Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials seeking to boost morale. His statement, deemed too discouraging for publication, revealed the complete change in German attitudes. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a fighter when needed. But beyond the machine is what it represents: unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose one, it's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage. And courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. But even with aircraft and fuel, German pilots faced an impossible equation. Attacking meant facing P-47 formations that owned every altitude from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His meeting with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded. The wings separated. I barely escaped. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire group. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The mental impact was complete. German pilots developed what medical officers called jabo fever, physical symptoms of stress appearing when thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against P-47s. The distinctive thunder of approaching thunderbolts caused panic among ground troops, who knew that survival meant finding cover immediately. The final statistics of P-47 operations defied understanding. In Europe, 3,552 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 3,315 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 6,000 railway cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives destroyed, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles destroyed, 68,000 trucks destroyed, 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. In the Pacific, 697 Japanese aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 150 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 2,500 vehicles destroyed, 150 locomotives destroyed, countless barges, ships, and installations. The 9th Air Force alone, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 230,973 combat missions, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. The Thunderbolt units achieved a 4.6-to-1 kill ratio in aerial combat, while keeping the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind these numbers lay the human cost. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots, killed in combat against Western Allied forces. Many fell to the focused fire of American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of training that Germany could never replace. By war's end, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. At the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center at Oberursel, captured Allied pilots were questioned by German intelligence. The records captured in 1945 revealed German assessments of Allied aircraft. The file on the P-47, updated continuously throughout the war, showed the complete reversal of opinion. April 1943. Large, unmaneuverable fighter, inferior to German types in all performance measures, except dive speed. Machine gun weapons insufficient against cannon-armed fighters. Assessment minimal threat. December 1943. Exceptional high-altitude performance, extreme structural strength, firepower increasingly problematic, pilots showing improved tactics. Assessment significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944. Dominant fighter bomber. Superior to all German types above 20,000 feet, firepower devastating against all target types, structural strength makes shoot-down extremely difficult. Assessment critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945, best fighter bomber of the war. Combination of firepower, durability, and performance unmatched. Pilot quality exceptional. Assessment unsurvivable in direct engagement. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, former enemies met in peace. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. His response, recorded on video, captured the complete transformation. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat," we said. "They built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of wearing down, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win." They were right. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed like it was falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable, the visibility excellent, the controls precise. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one required an engine more complex than anything Germany produced. Yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The P-47's design represented American industrial thinking perfectly. Brute force engineering backed by unlimited resources. Every part was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing supports could hold 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount could withstand 12 G-forces. The control cables were doubled throughout with automatic backup systems. The ammunition feed system alone was a marvel of engineering. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each holding 425 rounds, fed through electric boost motors to prevent jamming during high-G maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude. Each gun had its own charging mechanism and could be individually synchronized. The convergence was adjustable from 150 to 400 yards, allowing pilots to optimize for their preferred engagement range. Even after the war, some German veterans maintained that the P-47 won through numbers, not quality, that German fighters were technically superior but overwhelmed by quantity. The combat records tell a different story. In engagements where numbers were equal, P-47s consistently won. The heavy machine gun weapons, dismissed as inferior to cannons, proved more effective in actual combat. Analysis of gun camera footage revealed why. Cannon shells, while individually more destructive, required precise aim and had limited ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds total. The P-47's weapons created a probability cloud of bullets that guaranteed hits even with imperfect aim. At typical engagement ranges, a 2-second burst put at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, enough to ensure destruction. The ammunition itself was superior. American 50-caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds used a delayed-action fuse that ensured penetration before explosion. The incendiary compound burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite aluminum structure. German 20mm shells, while heavier, often exploded on surface contact, causing spectacular but sometimes shallow damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight of 10,000 pounds exceeded the gross weight of some twin-engine fighters. Its engine produced more power than entire bomber formations from the previous war. Its weapons delivered more firepower than a squad of infantry, yet it was built by the thousands, flown by kids barely out of high school, and maintained under combat conditions by mechanics who learned their trade in weeks. The transformation of German opinion from mockery to terror took less than 2 years. In that time, the flying milk bottle became the most feared aircraft in the Luftwaffe's experience. Veterans who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without flinching spoke of P-47s in hushed tones decades after the war. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits among other legendary fighters. Its sign lists specifications and battle honors, but the real story is told by a small display case containing spent .50 caliber shells and a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 coming apart under fire. Below the display is a quote from an unnamed German pilot taken from a 1945 interrogation report. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed those guns at you and you ceased to exist." The laughter died with our comrades. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of ridicule and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. In between, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and buried the Luftwaffe under an avalanche of half-inch projectiles traveling at supersonic speed. The mathematical reality was simple and brutal. In any engagement between equal numbers, the side with more guns firing more bullets won. The P-47 had both. The legacy of the Thunderbolt extended beyond its combat achievements. It established design principles that would influence fighter development for decades. Survivability mattered as much as performance. Firepower could compensate for maneuverability. Range and endurance were force multipliers that changed strategic calculations. The concept of the multi-role fighter, equally capable in air superiority and ground attack missions, became the standard for modern combat aircraft. The lessons learned from P-47 operations shaped doctrine training and industrial planning for every conflict that followed. Perhaps most significantly, the Thunderbolt demonstrated the decisive advantage of industrial capacity in modern warfare. Germany fielded technically sophisticated fighters with excellent performance characteristics. But America fielded good fighters in overwhelming numbers, supported by fuel, ammunition, trained pilots, and maintenance infrastructure that never failed. Quality matters, but quantity backed by logistics is unbeatable. The Luftwaffe fought with courage and skill, but courage cannot overcome empty fuel tanks and missing spare parts. Skill means nothing when the experienced pilot is dead and his replacement has barely learned to fly. The men who flew the P-47 in combat earned their place in aviation history. They transformed a machine initially mocked by friend and foe alike into the most successful fighter bomber of the European theater. They learned to exploit its strengths, accept its limitations, and push it beyond what designers thought possible. Names like Zemke, Johnson, Gabreski, Mahurin, and hundreds of others became synonymous with excellence in aerial combat. But behind every famous ace were thousands of ordinary pilots who flew their missions, fought their battles and brought their Thunderbolts home, or died trying. Ground crews who maintained the complex machines under combat conditions deserve equal recognition. Changing an engine in a muddy field during winter, repairing battle damage with improvised parts, loading ammunition and bombs in darkness before dawn missions. These men kept the Thunderbolts flying when conditions would have grounded lesser aircraft. Their skill and dedication multiplied American industrial power, ensuring that every aircraft produced reached the battle and stayed in the fight. The final chapter of the P-47's combat story played out in the skies over a dying Third Reich. By April 1945, German resistance was collapsing. Fuel shortages had grounded most remaining aircraft. The few German pilots still flying faced impossible odds every time they took off. P-47s ranged freely across Germany, destroying anything that moved. The thunder of 8 machine guns became the soundtrack of German defeat, a mechanical requiem for an air force that once ruled European skies. On May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered, P-47 Thunderbolt sat on airfields across Europe. Their massive propellers still, their guns silent, they had completed their mission. The flying milk bottles had become flying hammers that crushed the Luftwaffe into fragments. In 3 years of combat, they had rewritten the rules of air warfare and proved that American industrial might, combined with pilot courage and proper tactics, was an unstoppable force. The Germans had laughed in 1943. By 1945, there was no one left to laugh. Only survivors who would never forget the sound of those 8 guns. The thunder that meant death was diving from above, fast and unstoppable as an avalanche. That sound, more than any other, was the sound of Allied victory.